All right. Well, we're almost at the halfway mark through Ecclesiastes, so we're kind of bumping along here. We'll recap a little bit of what we talked about last week, and then just get into this week's lesson and get through chapter 5 and maybe a little bit into chapter 6. But last week, we started looking at the topic of ambition. And ambition, is that a good word or bad word? Yeah. I mean, yeah. So, like, is it selfish? Like, I mean, I don't know. I grew up thinking, like, it's good to be ambitious and to want to do something. But I guess taken too far is what we see in Ecclesiastes. Taken too far, it can lead to a bunch of bad here. And pretty much anything taken to an extreme, you can kind of see where, like, things just kind of turn off course. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon goes through pretty much everything. It's like, work, good. It's not good to be lazy, but work, good. But, like, too much and too obsessed with that, not good. So selfish ambition for more is not good. Like, and he lays out some of the things that he sees there. He sees that selfish ambition, it causes oppression of people because, like, the seeking more, like, ultimately there's some people that are pushed down by that. And it can also lead to loneliness. And he talks about, like, just how it's better to have relationships and just more and community, more people in your life and others to help take the burden of work or just be there for support kind of in a cold world, he talks about. He also talked last week about contentment is better than great gain and loneliness, where you don't have the ability to even enjoy what you have. So just an encouragement to be content with what God's blessed us with. And he's going to get into both of these topics a bit more this morning. With the big so what of what he's talking about through all of this is without God, like, any of these things is what he calls chasing after the wind. It's just a vapor. You can't catch it. And it's just in this life, the best thing that we can do is to do what Jesus calls in the Sermon on the Mount, store up treasures in heaven. That's what we're called to do. So you can kind of do a lot of comparison points between the Sermon on the Mount, between James's, the book of James, as he's talking about some wise things. You do a lot of comparison points between those books or those kind of sections of Scripture and what Solomon's going through here as he's talking in the Old Testament. This week we're going to continue on these topics. We're going to start off with chapter 5. I'm going to get somebody, if they can read the first section of chapter 5, read verses 1 through 7, and we'll just kind of see what this is saying. All right. What are some things he's talking about in here, or what are some key things that pop out to you? Short and sweet. Don't make a vow you can't keep. What else?
I think verse 2, be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven and you are on earth.
Yeah, you definitely get an appreciation of exalting God. Check yourself before you wreck yourself, as E.L. said a couple weeks ago. What else?
Similarly, with Catherine was saying, the verse 6, do not let your mouth lead you into sin. That verse right there, we have to intentionally keep ourselves from allowing our mouths to lead us into sin. It's a choice we make in our actions and our speech.
Yeah, and I mean, Book of James, he talks a lot about the mouth and just kind of watching out there because it can do a bunch of bad. Oh yeah, we've got ways to amplify our mouth even more now, and that can be even worse than just speaking is just how you speak online and kind of what you say.
King James version is a little different. It's that verse 7, it has it down in multiple dreams. In many words, there are also different entities of good words. So, I mean, you want something to happen, but then,
Yeah, and you get a little bit of a picture here of having these great aspirations and ambition of doing all of this stuff and taking it to God and just praying about it and just sometimes just not being patient and peace and just at peace and listening to God. But there's a lot here in this. I mean, it's just 7 verses, but the one part I like just when he says, "Stand in awe of God," like that's like just what we should like as you approach here. Stand in awe, and he talks about guarding your steps when you go to worship God, and like how often do we just kind of come in with a bunch of garbage in our head or just kind of thinking about things and just like instead of just coming to work, like just guard your steps and just kind of come to the Lord. Like we're not coming into the place is not the church, but like just guard our steps when we're praying, like clear our mind, just go somewhere kind of peaceful or kind of get our mind in a state of peace when we come to God. And then the other place that like better to be slow and say nothing, or slow in what we're saying, than to make a promise that we're not going to keep. And I mean, this is one where like I see this at work all the time too, where people are like, I'll get that done, and then it doesn't get done, or like and just in life we see that also as well. And this is one where like this section here, I was just popping out a number of things where there are just strong similarities between the Sermon on the Mount or James. A couple ones I'll call out. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, when Jesus is talking in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, keep your oaths that you've made to the Lord. Like, and just kind of do what you say you're going to do. Or in Matthew 6:2, he says, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by men. You kind of get a sense here like the wordiness that he's talking about is just talking to sound smart or talking to sound good or talking to convince the Lord, this thing I got this dream about, like really kind of please deliver this, Lord, here. Skipping down into Matthew chapter 6, verse 7, he says, when you pray, do not keep on babbling like the pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. And just, again, just calling us and admonishing us to kind of just be thoughtful and then just kind of know where we are when we're talking to God. And then in James chapter 1, verse 19, James talks about, he says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. And just again, you see so much harmony between these books here. In verse 1, he says, guard your steps. This week, the past weekend, I was walking in our backyard, and we try to keep our yard like mowed pretty kind of low so you can kind of see things in there. And even despite that, like I'm just walking out here talking to Jessie, and we're walking back to our garden, and she stops me, and I look, there's a big old copperhead, like walking right, like slithering right in front of us. And if she hadn't said something, I was about to walk on that thing. Dog was about to walk on that thing, and I was like, that it's a big one. Like they don't get that big. Like you see a lot of little baby ones. This one was a big dog like coming through there. And I was too slow to go get something to take care of him. But guard your steps, like guard our steps, guard our heart even as we come into church. The other thing it says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. So there's not a if you go into the house of God, it's a when. So it's just implying in this day and time when they were meeting, like the Jews, like they went to temple, like God was a key part of their lives. Like a lot of time they had other gods in their lives too, but like it's implied that you're going to be going to the house of God. In verse 2 he says, better than to offer the sacrifice of fools. Kind of what does he say as he goes through here? What does he say the sacrifice of fools looks like? Or what are some descriptions? A rash promise. Yeah, so it's not somebody who cannot learn but refuses to learn.
Live in a world of fools.
Yeah. Mine said something about just ignorant. They don't even know they're doing wrong. And it's not saying ignorant because like they couldn't learn or they couldn't know right from wrong. And we of course have Romans chapter 1 where it's obvious there's a God and it's obvious that there's a creator and we're below the creator. We're created beings like just even in the last chapter he compared us to animals. Like animals die, we die. We have limits. Some of the other things he talks about here is like quick, hasty, uttering anything, lots of words and talking versus listening, and just kind of being in that peace with the Lord. Compare like to if you kind of go back, like we won't have to skip over to this, but Psalms 46:10 where he says, "Be still and know that I am God." Like sometimes just kind of coming in and just listening. God knows what our needs are. He doesn't need us to babble on and on and on and on. And I'm guilty of doing this as well. But just be still and listen and know that God is God.
Well, and know in that verse, that's not my verse of it, but and know in that verse, it actually means to trust. The knowing is the trusting, because it's one thing to know something, it's another thing to live it, depend on it.
Yeah, it's beyond knowledge. It's a faith word in there of that. So God's exalted above us. He's God. We're his creation. We're his people. He compares in further down in the section in Ecclesiastes, he compares dreams to blabbering. Who has a lot of dreams? Anybody have a lot of dreams? Like when you have a lot of dreams, are good sleep nights or not good sleep nights? Depends. You more exhausted? I was reading a little blurb on this week because I saw that he mentioned dreams in here, and it was like dreams are just a normal part of sleeping and a normal part of healthy sleep, but they can contribute to low quality sleep, is what it says. And like sleep experts say, like if you have nightmares, like that can actually take away and just create anxiety as you sleep, and it may actually make you stay awake. Or upsetting dreams, or just having too many dreams can be bad, where your mind is just going and going and going and going and going. And a lot of times these dreams might be caused by like you have an unsettled mind, or you have just a lot going on that you're processing emotions or memories or things like that, versus just be still. And he says here, it says, for a dream comes with much busyness. And you kind of get the sense of like with dreams, you're not getting a restful sleep. You're kind of busy. And a fool's voice, he says, with many words. So he's talking less about the dreams here, but just like describing a dreamy sleep can be kind of busy. And a fool's voice is going to be a lot of talking, a lot of chattering, and maybe not saying much of kind of worth there. And similarly, the foolish sacrifice or worship is just blabbering of words. Then after this, he turns to vows. What do you think about like the word vow? I mean, we have wedding vows. That's probably the main time we hear about it. But a promise. That's what like when I was.
Promise can be broken. You should never, don't break that.
Yeah.
You know, promise to me feels light.
Yeah, like I compare it to like people like when they're dating, they might give a promise ring. That's got like maybe a promise ring is followed by an engagement ring or like, but even those things are like lighter than like marriage. You say vows before God, like you're not going to break these things here. When I looked it up in the dictionary, is a funny thing. We were going through our house cleaning up yesterday and getting rid of a bunch of stuff because it was rainy, and we found in one of these drawers this 2,500 page dictionary. It's like that thick. And we're like, what do we even need this thing for? Because it's a dictionary. But so I didn't look at that 2,500 page dictionary. I looked on online dictionary here. But what it said online, it says it's a solemn promise. So it's actually something, it's not just a promise, it's solemn. Like there's something there. And it went further, it says, one which a person is bound to an act or service or condition. So there's like this, hey, there's a commitment that's there. And when I was reading it, it was like, it sounds a lot like a covenant. We talk about covenants where there's like two parties in this contractual type relationship. But this solemn promise or these vows that he's talking about are things that you follow through on. You don't just make them in a willy-nilly fashion here. And in verse 4, when he says it, he starts again. He says, when you vow a vow to God. So again, not if you're going to vow a vow. Like we make promises to God here. When we become a Christian, we're making a vow. We're making Christ the Lord of our lives here. And here, when he's talking to these people, he's saying, when. And then he says some things about vows. He says a couple of them that he calls out here. He says, do not delay in fulfilling it. Like how many of us procrastinate from time to time? Any procrastinators in here? Yeah, I mean, like there's time. We know we can get it done when it needs to get done, but do not delay in fulfilling the vow. He goes on further. He says, like, do it. Like fulfill the vow that you make there. So don't not do your vows that you make. And then he goes through and he says, don't make excuses. In mine, he says that you do not say before the messenger that this was a mistake. So like that's maybe an easy one to say, oh, I got caught up in the emotions of it and I just vowed that vow or I said that thing. I didn't really mean to do that. But don't do that. Don't make a vow and kind of like take it that recklessly and say, I'm not going to do it. It was just a mistake there. So these vows, like just overall, like it's a commitment. And then he says this rhetorical question: why should God be angry and what you say and destroy the work of your hands because of this? And it's a reminder, like as I was going back here, this is Solomon talking. And Solomon, remember, he's kind of approaching the end of his life. He's seen a lot that has happened. He's built a lot. He's constructed the temple, his house, his mansion, and many things have been built. And maybe as he's thinking about this, there's a reminder back to the prayer that was made when they dedicated the temple after its construction. Let's get back to 1 Kings. If somebody can read 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 56 through 61.
Sorry.
1 Kings chapter 8, verses 56 through 61.
Blessed be the Lord who has given rest to his people Israel, according to all that he has promised. Not one word has failed of all his good promise, which he spoke by Moses his servant. The Lord our God be with us as he was with our fathers. May he not leave us or forsake us, that he may incline our hearts to him and walk in all his ways, and to keep his commandments, statutes, and his rules, which he commanded our fathers. Let these words of mine, with which I have pleaded before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night. And may he maintain the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel as each day requires, that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God, there is no other. Let your heart therefore be wholly true to the Lord our God, walking in his statutes and keeping his commandments as at this day.
Wow. Like there's a place when he's praying about this and kind of making these statements, his heart's really close to God, and he's making all these things, and you can't help but to see how God held up all of his promises. And you know how Solomon turns from God and he marries foreign wives and he worships other gods before him. Just how far he fell, and you kind of look at it and read that word and you say, why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Solomon's done all this work. He's done all these great things. God's angry at him because he turned his head. And you can't help but think this rhetorical question is one that's maybe a self-reflective and autobiographical reflection of someone who had been really close to God and then kind of fallen away. And now he's looking at it, this next generation. He's starting to see, like, this thing's just not going to play out like this. Like, I didn't follow God, and now there's a lesson learned here. You ever have people like tell you like a lesson learned and just kind of give you a bunch of advice and you're like, yeah. Like at work, we'll have these things called lessons learned. We're a lending company or a bank, so like, and lending is just one of these businesses where you can learn some bad lessons and people don't pay you the money back, and that's not great. But like they'll go through lessons learned of like, hey, these are some things that you don't do, or these are some things, and the purpose there is it's not bad to have a failure, but to repeat those failures is bad. And you can think through like in our lives here. It's sometimes good to just have somebody else's failure versus us failing and having to learn from it. Like good to learn a lesson from somebody who's done it, and they got the T-shirt from it. But like they can tell you like, hey, don't do this. So I have to always remember that because sometimes I get in my head like, I know what I'm doing here, or I can do this stuff here. But if you skipped on further in 1 Kings chapter 11, we're not going to go there right now, but God tells him in chapter 11, he's going to take the kingdom away from him, but not in his lifetime. But in his lifetime, what Solomon does see is he sees these enemies and factions kind of rising up, and he can kind of get a glimpse of, this is just not going to go well, and it's my fault here. But let's any other thoughts there before we shift gears to the next section here in Ecclesiastes?
One comment. When you make a promise to someone, that is also showing them your faith in God. And I'm very careful when I make promises. Because if I don't keep my promises to them, how can I ask them to trust God? And he doesn't make promises. I mean, I think about that very much with my grandkids, you know. If I promise them something, I'm going to do it. And when they ask me to do something at times, I'll tell them I can't promise you that. I can try, but I cannot promise that to you.
Well, we could tell witness.
It does.
When we don't stand
It
by
does.
it.
And I think that's one thing that we need to be careful about, you know. And you can't go, oh, well, that didn't happen, or, you know, whatever. I mean, circumstances do happen, but we need to be careful with that word and in our witness. Like, if I promise to bring somebody a meal, I need to carry through with that meal.
Yeah, be reliable. And I mean, just even as Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no.
Right.
Just better to say the no than to say a yes and don't deliver on what you said you were going to do. Other thoughts? Let's skip on down to verse 8. If I can get somebody to read verses 8 through 20.
If you see the poor oppressed in a district, and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things. For one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all, the king himself profits from the fields. Whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is evil. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owner except to feast his eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of a rich man permits him no sleep. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owner, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when he has a son, there is nothing left for him. Naked a man comes from his mother's womb, and as he does, so he departs. He takes nothing from his labor that he can carry in his hand. This too is a grievous evil. As a man comes, so he departs, and what does he gain, since he toils for the wind? All his days he eats in darkness, with great frustration, affliction, and anger. Then I realized that it is good and proper for a man to eat and drink, and to find satisfaction in his toilsome labor under the sun, during the few days of life God has given him, for this is his lot. Moreover, when God gives any man wealth and possessions, and enables him to enjoy them, to accept his lot and be happy in his work, this is a gift of God.
Thanks, Stacy. What are some things he's talking about here?
That scripture that Paul talked about, beware you have the striving after more and more.
So contentment, being content. What else? It's a blessing. Like, and he talks about like just the opposite of that, not being able to find satisfaction is not good. What else? He's got this theme here that we're going to get to pretty early in here, where he talks about just the perils of ambition. And he talks about it causing the oppression and injustices in the world, or causing worry and discontentment and frustration. You can't have enough, and you can't take it with you, and you don't really have time to enjoy it. So he talks about these things as having harm to the actual person as well there. And then he kind of wraps it up and just talks about like where there's contentment, joy in the Lord. That's where it's at. We're starting verses 8 and 9 here, and he kind of describes this vicious cycle. And he says, when you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, don't be amazed, or I think yours said, don't be surprised by this. This is one of those things where we can see it in life. And when he's looking at it, he's saying, well, it's caused by the pressure, or the oppression is caused by someone. But if you look at every one of those someones that's causing the oppression, there's someone above them that's causing some pressure on that person. If you look at that person, there's somebody above them, and there's somebody above them, and somebody, and so it goes. There's always some higher up. And wow, have you ever seen those human pyramids where like the people kind of keep getting on it? The person at the bottom of that human pyramid, they got a job. Like they got all the pressure of all of that on them. And that's kind of this picture here is like the oppression. When you see that person, you're like, man, they got all these higher ups, and everybody's got oppression going on there, and just this vicious cycle there. And he kind of ends this kind of by saying, the king is not working in the fields, but he's benefiting from what the laborer's doing and profiting from the fields. Everybody's benefiting and profiting from this because that's the cycle that's created. And you kind of, while he doesn't say it here, you kind of get this picture that the ambition for all those people to kind of get more. And he talked about in the last chapter, he talked about the person who rises from, maybe they were in prison, or maybe they were the poorest person in the country, but they rise to be the king. And that doesn't sound bad, but he talks about in everybody's selfish ambition and just kind of going after more, it kind of causes that. Because like somebody's going to be like, well, I want to get to that next level. So you kind of climb up to that level, and then you're just kind of sitting on top of them, and then somebody else. And just this kind of life that's created with this ambition for more, is it just causes more of this in the long run. And like as you think about like what Jesus says we're always going to have the poor with us. And when he's talking about another thing, and you just get a picture of like in our life, in this life, we should take care of others, but just also know it's not perfect in this world. Like it's not been perfect since Adam and Eve. This reminds me of the like just even thinking about the higher ups, and the higher ups here is when you think about in the New Testament, who were the people that everybody hated? Tax collectors. Nobody liked tax collector. But like who's the ultimate tax collector in that picture? Rome. Rome's the bad guy, but like everybody hates the tax collector. And the tax collector, what's he doing? He's throwing another tax on top of it. He's like, I'm gonna just get a little bit of margin. Like I'll take a cut here and charge us more. And you get this picture of like there's the tax collector doing stuff, but the tax collector has to pay taxes too to Rome. So there's this kind of cycle here of that, and we see that in life pretty much everywhere is oppression. If we skip to James for a second, because James, like this is where I kind of started seeing a lot of James kind of popping up. In James chapter 4, in verses 1 and 2, he says, what causes fights, or what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war with you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You get this picture of just like all this fighting and quarreling and everything. Like when you look back at wars and you look at things, you're like, somebody wants more. They're fighting for more, and they covet what they can't have, and thus it creates more of that. He goes down further in chapter 4. If you skip down to verses 13 through 17, and here he says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. You do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it's sin." You get this picture here of, he calls it a mist, or it vanishes, and you kind of get the sense, if you compare it back to Ecclesiastes language, where he talks about chasing after the wind, or things are meaningless, or like a vapor here. And then the last thing in 5 and 6, or in James chapter 5, 1 through 6, he also just has a lot to say about the same topic. He says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in these last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed the fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvester have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you." This is not saying like being wealthy is bad, but like when you get this picture of this selfish ambition and just kind of continuing to chase after more and more and more and more and more, and knowing that means like oppression and more of these types of things, that selfish indulgence is what James is admonishing here, and that selfish indulgence is what Solomon, he knows. That's what he's ruled over. He's at the top of this pyramid in Israel. He's the one that kind of, he sees what's happening, but he's at the top of the pyramid here. God, of course, is above him, but he sees it, and he's the ultimate cause of this. Thoughts here?
I don't see too much here because we're a lot younger. If you go to Europe and see castles everywhere, and one guy's got a bigger castle than the other guy. And when you look at history, they're all fighting to get a bigger castle. We have the same thing in a smaller percentage, maybe a bigger house, more luxurious. But you see it, we're playing it wasn't enough.
Yeah, it's never enough. And that's what you see throughout this section, what James is talking about. But you also see it like just in the Ecclesiastes when he's talking about it here. It's just never enough here. He talks about for the lover of money, no amount's enough. You're always looking for the next thing. It's never satisfied. And the more you have, he talks about, it's not even doing you well. If you're this lover of money, he talks about a couple things here. He says, the more you have, the more consumers of it you have. And I saw that in the Message version. He talks about the more loot you have, the more looters will be around. And it'll be daylight, and you'll just be able to kind of see them looting you. That's probably the negative version of it, but like the more you have, the more people are like, hey, you got this money, can I have a loan? Or the more you have, the more you're just spending and doing things there. It's never enough. And thus, like I even had this picture in my head. I don't know if many of you watched Scrooge McDuck as a kid, where he's got pools filled with gold coins. and he has nothing to do but to just look in awe. Maybe he takes a dive and swims in this pool of money that's out there. But at the end of the day, these things they don't cause rest for the rich. They cause worry, and worry about getting more, or worry about protecting what he or she has. It's never enough. And compare that to the contentment that he talks about when he compares it to the content laborer. He says, whether he has little or much, but the full stomach, like he gets sweet sleep, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. You kind of get this picture of just like it's better to be content and have a little than to be discontent and have a lot. Just in addition to being away from God, you just got all of these kind of negative physical and mental things that are there. Any thoughts there?
You kind of
Yeah, we could read this as in our generation and time where we have just chasing after more, like that's just life, and that's the motto. We could do well to listen from somebody who did it. He had it all, and he got to the end of his life, and he's now reflecting on that. It wasn't enough, and it was what he calls several times here. He talks about it being a grievous evil. Skipping through, like in verses 13 through 15. He calls this grievous evil here, where the owner is kind of hurt by the riches. We don't typically think about that, but he says while he has everything, this hoarding causes the wealthy harm. And then he gives this example of lost wealth, where some bad investment could leave them with nothing for his son. I'll pause here for a second because I couldn't help but to wonder, like the bad investment that he's talking about here, is he just looking at the enemies kind of surrounding them and knowing that for his own son he's going to pass forth the kingdom, but it's not going to last. It's going to be torn apart. And he's looking at like the bad investment is his life. He made some bad investments and some bad choices, and they're going to pay off, and God's already told him this kingdom's going to be ripped apart. It's going to be not in your lifetime, but it's going to be taken away here. And this accumulation that he's done his whole life he's now kind of seeing it fall apart and knowing that the future is here. So it doesn't say that in here, but like as I think about where Solomon is and I think about the history and kind of where he goes, his unfaithfulness is his bad investment, and it just doesn't pay off here. And then he ends this section here with in verse 17 or like in verse 16 that I'm skipping all around here. I'm losing myself here. But naked as a man comes, so he goes. So like you can't take any of this stuff with you. Despite kind of earning or building or accumulating any kind of wealth here, you're going to you're going to leave the world with what you came into it with, which is exactly nothing. We can't take it with us. Skip down to verses 18 through 20, and he talks about it's good and proper to find satisfaction in what God's given us, what we got. That's our lot in life. Who just has like had to learn about just contentment or just being satisfied or just taking it easy and settling in from time to time? Like I'll say it. Be content. James, you're going to learn about this tomorrow, man. Just wake up like after working for what'd you say, almost 50 years, and just being like, just.
One comment, one thing I was thinking about work, probably my last day. I reflected on a lot, and some people said, James, we take away from this. It is true that person takes nothing from the flavor, but he can't carry his hand. I put so much sweat, effort, my work, years and years, and I walked away with a box. And yes, I've been paid along the way, but all the time, all the effort, yeah, it was daily bread from God, the job, and I walked away with so true.
Yeah. I had that's such a great point. I had a leader at Capital One retire a few years ago, and they were having this big party shindig for him, and it was like right after COVID, so a bunch of people weren't there, so they had it on like on a patio outside, but on a Zoom call, so it was kind of surreal. But somebody asked him this question. They were like David, you've done all this awesome stuff in your life. What are you most proud of? And he'd worked on lots of technology projects and things where you kind of look around at almost all the technology we have in the company and say, oh, David did that, and kind of he was leading that and leading that. And everybody's like expecting him to talk about this platform or thing he built, and he was like, when I look around and see the people, that's the thing that I'm proudest of, like, or feel best about. And I was like, that just kind of hit home of the relationships, like that, the friendships, the people that kind of learned from him or the people that taught him something along the way. That's what he was going to take away. That's what he was proudest of, not the things, not the accomplishments overall.
I would add that too. That was the hardest part. That's a great day. But the hard thing by those people that you put so much time into those relationships, that was a great day.
Yeah, I've had those moments where I'm looking back, like doing a resume update. So I haven't gotten to the retirement yet, but like even doing a resume update where you're just kind of looking at it going, like, I remember that person. I remember like that person over here. It kind of hits you when you have those self-reflective moments. But he talks here, he says, it's just good to just find enjoyment. And sometimes it's hard to find enjoyment, or sometimes it's hard to just pause and just be thankful and say, I'm good. Like, God's blessed me with a bunch. And even though I might not have everything I want, he's blessed me with what I need and takes care of me. And that's what he calls our lot in life. When he says lot in life here a few times throughout Ecclesiastes so far, like, it sounds a little negative, 'cause like, that's just my lot in life. That's just kind of what I have. But sometimes it's just to realize we're created. We're not the creator here, and just kind of appreciating what we have. I do like how he talks about, he says, this is what we have for these few days we have under the sun. A lot of times when we're looking at things and we're thinking about like dreams and all the things we can accomplish here, we don't appreciate that it's short. Like, we should take advantage of the moments we have here, because in the big picture, there's only a few days under the sun. And if you were to kind of take that metaphorical picture, when people take the rope and stretch it out and say, this is your life, this is eternity, like, just there's a realness to that here. And the last part of here, like when he's talking about this, it just reminds me of Philippians 4:4. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice is just to step back and just kind of have joy. Thoughts here on chapter 5?
I'm struck by verse 17 about the man who tries to get well. All his days he keeps in darkness with great frustration, working in evil. Darkness comes from not knowing God and life and contentment. And you can compare that to verse 19, where it says, "But God gives him wealth and possession, and enables him to be rich." Our enjoyment of what we have comes from our thankfulness and gratitude, knowing that it all comes from God, instead of grasping it and saying, "Look what I did."
Yeah, that is such an awesome point there. And it is a blessing to have, to be able to be appreciative and thankful for what we do have here. I like when he's talking about this, you get like both the metaphorical and the kind of literal piece here when he says in verse 17, "Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and anger." Like, on the literal side, he's worked so long that he's eating his meal in darkness. It's dark. Like, there's nothing going on. Like, he just has worked that much, and he has nothing to do but just to be frustrated and angry about he's not been able to even appreciate it. Let's.
I think the relativity of it, because I know what kind of thought we were going to do it. And I had to look at how it's lived. And they said, well, this is a double bed. I saw the little double bed, and usually this is a double bed, but it's different wherever we are in the world, wherever we happen to be. What people are content with can be way different than what we got so much.
Yeah, Gina was saying that last week when she was talking about that Mexico mission trip, where they've got nothing for a lot of those people that were there, and they're just so appreciative of what they had. Let's keep going into chapter 6. If I can get somebody to read verses 1 through 12. This is a short chapter.
There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. Man, in whom God has been gracious himself in honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself in all that he desires. Yet God does not give him power to eat of it, but the foreigner pursues it. This is vanity, and it is an evil affliction. If a man begets 100 children, it lives many years, so that the days of his years are many. His soul is not satisfied. moves out north for a living. Better to have the eyes than wandering in the summer. This also acts as rest and food. Whatever one is, he has been named already, or is known what he is known, and you cannot contempt with it. Since there are many things that increase them, how is he better? For who knows what is good, man in life, all the days of this waning life which passes like a shadow. Who can tell a man what is happening after him under the sun?
Yeah, this one is kind of more pessimistic sounding than certainly the last section here. But what are some things that we kind of hear in this section? Or what are some themes that kind of pop out?
A lack of contentment, having much and still feeling completely and totally discontent.
Yeah, I know, like, sometimes people say, like, if it's repeated, it's an important thing, and certainly you've got some repetition around this point of just contentment and just how bad it is to be discontent. He goes through and he's going to have a couple of really like negative images that he compares this to make a point here. But he's essentially kind of getting to it's better to have joy with what you have and have nothing than to have a bunch of things and not have joy. In verses 1 and 2, he says a stranger is going to enjoy this instead. And again, like thinking through Solomon's life, a stranger is going to come through and enjoy a lot of the toils of his hands because his kingdom's going to be broken apart here, and he's not going to enjoy it, and maybe he's not even taking time to enjoy what he's done in this life. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Catherine. No, I was going to skip.
I didn't mean to cut you off, I apologize. But is it just me, or does do verse 1 and 2 very, very strongly smack of autobiographical as well? I mean, he is blatantly, I think, calling himself out. Like, look at what I've done. This is the life that I lived. I mean, there's I in here several times. There is the lamenting over the man that does this. Like, it's almost like, I'm going to sit here tonight, I'm going to journal about what a wretch I've been. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
That's what this feels like so strongly. Almost, I think personally, more strongly in these verses than in anything we've read thus far. I read this and I hear this man like bleeding on his page.
I agree with you. Like, I think as you go through here, it's almost like you're reading a diary
Yeah, it feels
of
like
somebody writing these thoughts down as they're reflecting on like life. And instead of like being able to reflect back and think about like all these great relationships, like he's not thinking of like James described like at the end of his work career, like he's walking out with a box. But like James wasn't sitting there going like, what a mess that was. He's just saying like that's all that he got out of it. Like it just like and the relationships were really where it matters. You don't get the sense when he's writing this journal, he's not talking about I just got a box. He's got regrets.
And this is
That-
talking about probably one of the richest men in the world. He's probably more than any other leader.
He's had peace, but he's got regrets. And to me, that's the thing that he's talking about in a lot of this, and that's why it's so tough here. In verse 3, he gives an example of a man with 100 children and who lives a long life but doesn't receive a proper burial. Now, this kind of smacks, like I was just reminded of the kind of song, Cats in the Cradle, of this person who works and kind of neglects his child, only to grow up and see his child neglect him when he's got time for him. In Jewish culture, it would have been really important for the children to bury the parents. And you see this kind of hyperbole that he's got here, like this man he's got 100 kids, and Solomon probably has way more than 100 kids because he has 700 wives and 300 concubines. So, but he's got 100 children, and none of them have time to bury him. Like, what kind of relationship would that have been? And he lives a long time, so like he lives a long life. He has 100 children, and no one's there to bury his parent despite all of that. He then goes on to another kind of negative comparison point here, and he compares this to this life of this rich person who's living in discontent to a stillborn. And that's a really sad picture, and it's a sad experience for parents that have gone through that. Bathsheba, David and Bathsheba's first child would have been a stillborn. We don't know the name of that child. We don't know all what happens there, but maybe he's even got that image from just growing up with a family that had that kind of loss here. But he describes this stillborn situation. He says that person has they've never seen the light. They likely have no name. And he says, despite this, he says that person, that stillborn baby, had a better life than the person who lives 1,000 or 2,000 years, but fails to enjoy the prosperity and fails to have joy. And wow, that you're basically comparing someone who had no years on earth to somebody who has 1,000 or 2,000 years and has everything. And again, this, Catherine, when you talk about autobiographical, you kind of get this, man, he's going in deep on this one.
I see there's two planes or two levels of satisfaction here in this song I'm talking about. On the one hand, going back to chapter 5 and 18, we kind of repeat this a few times throughout the book. It's good for one to work and eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of his labor. There's a level of satisfaction. Yesterday, we came out of the garage. My level of satisfaction is so high. Absolutely love a good burger, a good meal. But then in chapter 6, twice already here, it was in verse 3, he says that his soul is not satisfied. And then he repeats that phrase again in verse 7, that his soul is not satisfied. That is a deeper level of satisfaction that only God can provide.
Yeah.
I can sit down and say, I had a great day working, but that doesn't fill my soul. Or I can sit down and enjoy a really great slice of pizza, and that makes me so happy, but it doesn't fill my soul. So there's this interesting separation that I think is also not key part of it. So there's this surface level satisfaction, but then this deeper soul level satisfaction. He's saying all these other things will never be able to fill that.
Yeah, I love pulling that out, Caleb, because it's so true. He's gotten to a couple times now where he talks about fearing God, holding God in awe, and just God being that thing that fills it. And here he's calling out the soul is what's thirsting here. And maybe people thought physically Solomon was filled up because he got everything. He must be loving life, and he's not really loving life because he doesn't have his soul filled.
And a good lesson for us. We see people today holding up a big house and fast car. They must be so happy. That's just all the surface level. We don't know. We don't know what they got going on.
It's a culmination of their life too, as far as the soul, their body, everything.
Multiple levels. Exactly. He's got this other comparison. He's doing a lot of comparison points here of just one extreme to the next extreme. He compares the wise man and a fool, and a rich man and a poor man, and he ultimately gets to this appetite and selfish ambition here. It's kind of rotting for the wise man, or for the fool, or for the rich man. Here, where they just are kind of never getting enough, but this is something it's not a good thing here. A name of this section, if we were kind of writing a name for this section in his journal, I wrote down, we might say reflections of the richest and wisest person who ever lived and who never had contentment, because that's what this whole section is about. He's got, in physical terms, he's got everything. But he doesn't have joy, and it's because he's got God missing from it. If we wrap up this section overall, we can kind of get this picture that everybody's got this God-shaped hole in them, and they're trying to fill it with something. Like everybody, you can go out there and say like everybody's trying to fill it with something. Riches, wealth, fun, kind of buying that next thing overall, but they're all trying to fill it with something. So everybody intrinsically has an openness for God. They may not know it, but they got an openness because they're all searching and filling it with something. So it helps me a little bit when I look at it and say there's people that might not believe in God or might be even just adversarial to God, to say, well, they got that hole too. They just don't know what the solution, or they don't know what the piece that goes in that hole is. And if they did, then they'd be walking around in joy, and they'd be walking around not as an adversary, but as kind of a partner in the gospel here. And that's probably the thing that we need to walk around more with, is just knowing everybody's got that hole. And it's the hole that's the same size hole that I had. I just am filling it differently. And then the last thing I had here is just being content with God's blessings, whatever they are, wherever they are. That's a blessing. And for us, you can kind of also get this picture here with Solomon, like when he talks about this story of just this rich man who kind of has a bad investment and has nothing to pass on to the generation. I think for us to look at that, like he had a splitting kingdom that he was passing on to Rehoboam to take over. Like it wasn't a good thing. Now Rehoboam wasn't a wise person either in kind of running the kingdom. But for us, another thing that we can pass on to our next generation is them seeing contentment, them seeing us content in Christ and putting Christ first there, because those are riches that like it can pass on from generation to generation and have a great benefit. And I think that kind of aligns a lot to what when Jesus is talking about storing up treasures in heaven, is those are treasures. They can pass along. They're not going to rot away. Yeah, it is one of those things where it's on, like if you read the words on the page and just see it, but if you just put yourself in his shoes and say like, I would have been really frustrated at this thing, or I would have been really mad. Like I'd have had some bad days if I were in those situations, but just seeing like contentment, and all started with contentment and what God was blessing him with. Ridge?
There's a C.S. Lewis quote that says, human history is the long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God to make him happy. Because when you talk about the God-sized hole, everybody's got it, and history is nothing but man trying to figure out how they can fill it with things other than God. And like Solomon was pointing out, he's had everything, still ignoring,
Yeah.
no substance.
You kind of can almost picture like a little kid trying to put a puzzle piece in and try every single puzzle piece that's in there, and then and finally get to the right puzzle piece that fits there. When the right puzzle piece fits there, it fits there. And that puzzle piece for everybody is God, not every other wrong thing. Any other thoughts before we wrap up? Awesome. Caleb, would you mind closing us with prayer?
God, thanks so much that you are the thing that satisfies us. And God, I just pray that you help us to clear the distractions so that we can fix our eyes on you and focus on you and find that satisfaction that you want us to have. And again, we can only find you. We ask your blessing now as we head over to worship, and God, we pour our hearts out to you and lift you up and remember your son and honor him and be your own table. Praise the name of your son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everybody.